Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. I'm David, your podcast host, and I'd like to say that we are finally getting into some of our backlogged material from April. This episode is with Jason Enos. He's an artist from South Carolina who was recommended to me by another of my podcast guests, Sadie Geerligs of Sadie by Design. Definitely a good episode, really fun, and I hope you enjoy it. If you're interested, he has his Facebook page and website, so definitely give those a look. If you're interested in seeing what other episodes are coming up, definitely check out our Facebook page, or you can go to our Patreon site. For as little as $1 a day, you get access to the recording list. You get access to a monthly schedule ahead of when it's posted on Facebook. And just depending on your level, I do post early access episodes. Once I get them completed, I post them onto that Patreon site for those who might be interested. We also have shirts available on TeePublic, and I have stickers. So if anybody's interested in getting a sticker, let me know by email or on Facebook, and I'll be happy to mail one to you. Again, thank you so much. This episode is actually the 100th episode of Tales from the Fandom. Not by number order, because by number order it's number 73, but along with all the specials and anniversary episodes and the different episodes that have been put out, this is the 100th published episode for Tales from the Fandom. So thank you, everybody, for listening and downloading and sharing and just being supportive. Without people listening, there wouldn't really be a podcast. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I really I'm over the moon. So thank you, and I hope that September treats everyone well.
Welcome to Film Roast.
Hey everyone, Hannah here, the co-host of Film Roast, where two overcaffeinated and underqualified friends talk about all things movies. If you like film factoids, lots of sarcasm, and bad impressions, check us out on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can also follow us on Twitter @FilmRoastShow and like us on Facebook, facebook.com/FilmRoast. Happy roasting!
We didn't listen to our parents, and now we get into cars with complete strangers. My name is Mike O'Connor. I drive for a rideshare company and host a weekly podcast called Can I Get a Ride? Having a stranger get into your car can be anxiety-inducing. Lucky for me, I like to talk. Listen in as I share stories of passengers from all walks of life, reflect on shared experiences, and laugh at the outrageous overheard conversations coming from my back seat. Can I Get a Ride can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and more. Be sure to check out my website at canigetaride.podcast.com. Follow on Twitter at MYKOCONNOR and on Instagram at Can I Get a Ride. I drive, we talk, I get hungry. That's life.
Hey everybody, we are here on Tales from the Fandom with our latest episode, and I'm joined today by yet another artist as I continue to try and expand the Tales from the Fandom universe into the world of art. His name is Jason. He's a freelance illustrator who focuses on portraiture, and he is working on ink. He's doing inks for ECV Press's Trixie Dynamite and Continuum Triad. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. I found you through one of our mutual friends, Sadie Geerligs, who's been on the show a few times now. I think she's had 3 episodes total.
Yeah, I've had a chance to listen to a couple of different ones she's been on.
Yeah, she's super awesome. She supported the podcast early on. I like to support whenever she tells me to go like somebody, and I think she had recommended your page, and I took a look and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I like art, and I especially liked, I believe it was the Rogue One piece that you had done. And I was like, I think I need to talk to you and have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thanks, definitely. Yeah, Sadie's awesome.
So what are some of the fandoms that you are into?
It's quite a few. Through my art and comics, I got into a couple of different things, but mostly growing up, it was Star Wars and Star Trek as a kid. And then as I grew up, I started getting into other things like Lost when that came on the air, and started getting into video games. Portal. Played a lot of Halo in college. Not too big on the gaming front, but I love Portal, Overwatch. I'm a movie geek. I love Christopher Nolan's films and Alfred Hitchcock's films.
Well, let's start with Star Wars. Are you? I guess the question is, I wouldn't normally ask a guest because I have a lot of female guests on, but are you an original Star Wars person, see it in the movie theater, or did you happen to catch it later on in life?
Well, I came in the generation that had the reruns on, like, what they do is they play the entire original trilogy, like, 4, 5, 6, I guess.
Hmm.
Now we're about to call them that. They used to play them Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, I think, as CBS movies of the week.
Okay.
I always would catch like the last half of Star Wars because we didn't get TV Guide, and my family, I'm like 8, 9, 10 years old, and we turn on the TV Friday night, like, oh, Star Wars is on. This is the weekend it's on, and then we remember to watch Empire and Return of the Jedi on Saturday and Sunday nights. So I watched that, and then I watched original series Star Trek when it was in reruns, and I was young enough that I still remember when Next Gen came out for the first time. So I
Okay.
really saw that from literally from the ground up. When they were releasing new episodes, I mean, my parents would watch it first to make sure there was anything bad or weird content. Back then, that's how young I was, and so I grew up on those.
As far as Star Wars goes, who's your favorite character?
Um, I probably have to say, as far as character development, probably Han Solo, but I've always kind of had recently kind of got more of a spot of an interest in Boba Fett, even though he's like the smallest character in the trilogy.
Hmm.
Because I played a lot of Halo Reach, and I used the jetpack a lot, and then I found myself making a lot of Boba Fett references, and I realized he's like only like he's like got like 4 lines, and but at the same time, like in Empire, he's like so bad and then like in Return, he's like such a wuss, he's just like
Right.
dies so easily. But like even in Empire, you see like even Darth Vader seems to kind of like treat him like a professional. I guess it seems like the reverse of what he was in Return of the Jedi, where he's almost like he's so easily just gotten rid of, and then in Empire he's just like this professional that Darth Vader treats was like, okay, I'll give you certain leniency.
Right, exactly. Like there's such a difference in the way the character is portrayed between Empire and Return of the Jedi. And he was one of those characters that everyone wanted more of. And I grew up on the Star Wars franchise like from videotapes because I had
Mm-hmm.
missed everything. I was too young to see any of them at that point. So videotapes is how I got into it. And like Boba Fett was always that character. Like he out of all the background characters or the side characters, he was one of those characters that everyone just seemed to gravitate towards. And even in some of the books that they publish, which are now in the non-canon Legends area, that they've shuffled off almost all the books too. They've had a ton of different character development for Boba Fett and what he did or where he came from. And this was, of course, before the prequels came out,
Yeah,
which just really expanded his character and who he was. And then we got the prequels.
yeah. There's those. It was like in the original three, you got just a tantalizing glimpse of him, and then you got a chance to. I did like the fact that you got to see that he was basically a clone of
Hmm.
his father, which I can see that kind of emphasize even more that loner aspect.
Exactly. Of the Star Wars movies, which one is your favorite?
Ooh, that's a good one. If we can we count all 7,
Yeah,
or I should
well,
say all 8
all
technically.
seven plus Rogue One. Yeah.
I would have to say probably a tie between Empire and um, Force Awakens, but probably Empire more just because it is a great movie by itself, and yet it makes an excellent part two. It leaves you wanting more, but it
Hmm.
doesn't tell an incomplete story.
Right, and it is so like I know that there's all the jokes about Empire, like the second movie in a trilogy is always the best one. A lot like Godfather Part 2 and Empire and a few different other franchises.
Dark Knight.
Dark Knight. So like I of all the movies, Empire is my favorite, but there's always like that line from the Kevin Smith movies that it ends just on such a down note. Like Empire is just that movie where everything the rebels have done, it's like they're failing. They've lost Han. Luke lost his hand. It's just a movie where it feels just very realistic as far as there's this ragtag bunch of people going up against this huge empire, and they really needed that kick in the pants, so to speak.
They got their butts kicked, yeah.
And I was surprised that you mentioned Force Awakens as a possible contender, because I know some people had problems with it being so similar to A New Hope.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's newer in my memory, and I guess because I had such low expectations after Phantom Menace and the other two. I think a lot of people feel that way. So when Force Awakens came out, I remember watching it, and for the first 30 minutes, I was like, this isn't Star Wars. This isn't Star Wars. This isn't Star Wars. They're overacting. Look at those Imperial folks. They're overacting. They always overacted, even the original trilogy. But I wasn't accepting it. And then when Rey got to the Millennium Falcon, I'm like, okay, this is the Millennium Falcon. Okay, whatever. And when they took it off and they started flying, the action sequence, I'm like, okay, this is Star Wars now. And then I was taken in. Yeah, it's true. It's true what you said about that. There's a lot of parallels. It's almost like a parallel universe, A New Hope. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was watching the same movie twice. There was some differences, and I appreciated that, and it was well done. And for that, I give them, I still watch it, even though I know what's going to happen. So that, I guess, is a sign it's a good movie.
The one that I've been watching the most recently on repeat has been definitely Rogue One. Just because, I mean, the first half is for me a struggle because it's just so much of like the characters being introduced and giving you all this different stuff. But that last half where they're on, I think it's Scarif, and like the starfighter battle above, and then everything that's happening on the planet, I could watch that every day.
And the part with I don't know if he's a monk or what, but where he's like, the force is with me. I've been saying that like nonstop for the last couple days.
Yes, he's my second favorite character that I love from that show or from the movie. I really dug K2SO the most. Like, he stole that movie for me.
That's the part I remember the most, was his little quips. And I think it's true. A lot of folks said that he almost was the most human of all of them, and he's like a robot. So got a little bit of that, what's the name of that movie? Blade Runner syndrome, where the robots are almost more human than the humans are.
Exactly. Are you looking forward to Last Jedi coming out at the end of the year?
Definitely. Out of all of the newer movies, the only one I've seen in the theaters have been the two most recent. I never saw Phantom Menace in theaters, or Clone Attack of the Clones, or the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith.
I never saw any of those in the theaters. So when they finally brought out Force Awakens, I'm like, this is my chance to see Star Wars on the big screen, but I hope it's good. And I heard good reviews. So, and then when that was good, I was like, okay, I'll go see Rogue One. So I'm definitely excited. I watched the trailer for it, and I'll be honest, I don't know what's going on, and I know there's been folks that have literally taken it frame by frame and blown up parts of the trailer. Like in the upper left corner, you can see it for I haven't done that. I'll just wait for the movie to come out. Whatever I find in the trailer is not going to tell me the plot anyway. I'll just enjoy it when it comes out.
Exactly. I was lucky back in 96 or 97, they did the re-release of all the original movies into the movie theater, one after another. And so we were able to go see that. And then I think it's like a year and a half later, Phantom Menace came out. And I think I saw that movie, and, I hate to admit it, but I think I saw that movie 7 or 8 times in the theater. And I was one of those ones where it's like, oh man, the pod racing is cool. Like that whole action sequence and the fight with Darth Maul. Like, because you'd never seen lightsaber fighting like that before. And
No.
but then as time went on, you're like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that I can fast forward in this movie.
It definitely had some really good set pieces that are essential. And then there was a lot of talking that didn't make much sense and seemed like it was going nowhere.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those movies. I have a few podcaster friends who have been talking about the movies, and they spoke very glowingly about Phantom Menace for what it was and what it provided, and laying some of that foundation for the later movies. But they even had some of the same issues where it's just there's a lot of stuff and it's a lot of dialogue and heavy on like banking and business, and it just got to be too much. And I think that's one of the things that I'm glad of with Disney's purchase of Lucas is that they're able to have their own writers and directors. Besides the new Star Wars movies that we have, like Last Jedi, and then number 9, we've got the new Han Solo movie that's going to be coming out soon. And that'll have Lando Calrissian in it with Donald Glover playing him, and that looks to be real fun, hopefully.
Yeah, I saw like a cast shot. Good, because it was, again, that was speaking of the tantalizing Empire. Empire did a great job of suggesting meaningful stories that we knew happened that we never witnessed, but we got enough of it to satisfy the storytelling needs, but not like without us going, I wonder what happened then. One of them being, of course, Boba Fett. Another one being when when Han first gets to Bespin and starts talking about how he won the Millennium Falcon from Lando. And it's like, they obviously have a history. I mean, they've hinted at it as they're approaching the planet, but you kind of want to know what they did. They seem like they're like old drinking buddies or something. And you're like, there's a story there. And I really want to know what that story was and what other tales they could tell about their past.
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to having it being canon instead of everything that's existed in the Legends book series, all the different books that covered their relationship, and see what they do with it.
It's going to be good, and well, at least I'm looking forward to it. I hope it's going to be good, but I think it will be. They, like I said, so far 2 movies. They've got 2 hits in my book. That's a good start, and I don't think it's going to be any change. Which I agree with you. I think the Disney acquisition was a great idea. Keep fresh talent in there, and keep an eye to the past. I like that they brought in Ewan McGregor to do voice lines as Obi-Wan for the Rey dream sequence. So they paid homage to the new trilogy without bringing in too many heavy elements that brings back bad memories for the folks that didn't like them too much.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it'll definitely be good to see where they take the franchise, because I know at one point they said that they were aiming to do a new Star Wars movie every year for like the next 10 or 15 years. And between 8, 9, and this Han Solo movie, that's the next at least 2.5 years for us now. And we'll just have to see what they've got up their sleeves next.
I'm excited about that. I thought it was funny seeing Rogue One. They called it a Star Wars story. When we got through it, I was like, no, that's Star Wars. Let's just call it what it is. It felt, when I saw that subtitle, I think a lot of folks felt like it was selling it short, because when they got to the actual movie, it was like, this is a solid movie. It's almost like the title is apologizing. Oh, it's kind of a Star Wars story in the same universe, but it's like, no, this is a solid story. You don't need to apologize for this one. This one's good.
Absolutely, definitely. And you said that you also grew up on Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I watched, like I said, the original series and reruns and Next Gen, and got into almost every series except I have not seen the animated series, and I wasn't a big fan of Enterprise.
Right there with you. I think I've caught a few bits and pieces of the animated series, but not seeing like the whole series in a whole. And I stuck with Enterprise for, I think, the first season, and then I was pretty much done after that.
From what I've seen in later seasons, it got interesting, but then it had to wrap up quickly because it was losing popularity. And they did some creative things from what I saw in the last pieces of it. I've only seen an episode through here and there, and a lot of it seemed like excuses to retcon and stuff. Like there was an episode where they encountered a Borg ship long before the Next Gen encountered them. And I think Voyager's kind of laid the groundwork for that kind of retconning, where they had, 7 of 9, where she was abducted from people that were Borg scientists when she was like like 2 or whatever it was, and no, it was like she was like 6 or 7 or something. But even so, if she'd been with the Borg for like 10 years or so, or I think they hinted it was like a long time she'd been with the Borg, and it's like, wait, if we just learned about the Borg like with next gen, how do we have these people that they're scientists, like they understand them? Even though they're supposing we're isolated somewhere, it just seemed like it was an awful bit of retconning where it was like, oh, now we know about the Borg for a lot longer than we hinted, and it just seemed like an excuse to make stories that shouldn't belong.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I did have a problem with, because I'd read some of the recaps online and be like, wait a minute, like they're totally messing with the timeline on I know they definitely did with like Klingons and a few of the others where it was just out of the ordinary as far as storylines go. And then I know that the ending was a big travesty of justice from a lot of people I've talked to about where it was all being watched on the holodeck, basically on the Enterprise.
Yeah, it was basically, from what I understand, it was almost like a Next Generation episode that benefited from the history of Enterprise, which wasn't a bad idea, but the problem was it kind of lost its specialness to find out that it's almost like learning that it's a dream, even though it was really, we knew it was a reenactment of what actually happened at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a cheat because we were seeing it not through the eyes of the characters of the show, but through the eyes of the characters of another show that was witnessing it as a replay. It's almost like watching somebody else watch a movie about the characters we're supposed to be watching.
Right. Absolutely. Now, what's your favorite Star Trek series?
Deep Space Nine, I'd have to say. I love
Me
all
too.
of them, but the depth of Deep Space Nine, the characters, the idea that they couldn't just cause a problem and fly away to the next place. If you made an enemy, you were stuck to face them the next week. And that's life. You don't get to just pull up your house and move to a different part of the world and say, oh, I never get to see my neighbor again. If you make your neighbor upset, you'll have to deal with that tomorrow. And that's Deep Space Nine kind of in a nutshell.
Definitely. And when they announced Deep Space Nine, I was really psyched and into it, because they're like, we're on a space station, we're not going to go anywhere, and they're just talking about the first season or 2 seasons before they start really diving into the Gamma Quadrant and all that storyline. But I was really happy when they transferred like Chief O'Brien over, because I loved O'Brien's character when he was able to have a character develop on Next Generation and see him grow on the space station. And then even the inclusion of characters I loved, like Cisco, and I really enjoyed like side characters like Quark and Rom and Nog and Garrick, who shows up in later seasons. And it's like you start with these just basic characters and then they just keep building on top of them, and you get these really dynamic relationships in that series.
And some of my favorite interactions are among the Cardassians, even though they're they're less than pleasant people for the most part, but especially like Garrick interacting with Damar or with Gul Dukat, who a lot of writers have said is basically like the Cardassian Hitler in a sense. And there's a lot of parallels to the Holocaust and what happens with Bajor and that. But it's interesting to see like Garrick and Dukat go back and forth with each other, because Garrick, here he is a spy, and so he's basically on the intelligence side of things, and you've got Gul Dukat, who's in the military and political sides of things. So they're both pretty good at what their particular line of work is, but they both kind of despise each other for their very various reasons, because here's Garrick, and he probably knows everything that Dukat's done in the dark, and here's Dukat who can't trust Garrick because he's trying to make an honest name for himself now. And, Garrick's trying to, steal and lie and cheat his way into whatever corner of the world he can get himself into.
Yeah, Garrick was one of those characters. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then Damar being basically the Cardassian equivalent of Braveheart, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I loved Garrick because he showed up and he's so innocent to us viewers at the time. He's just a tailor. He just wants to sew and make dresses and shirts and clothes, and then you start finding out like all of these little and it's not even a lot of something, it's little somethings peppered through an episode or a story arc, and then like once they really start that whole Cardassian swing of that story arc where everything's going on at Cardassia Prime and everything that's going on with the relationship with the Dominion. I mean, Garrick just goes from this character that you're like, oh, that's cool, that's Garrick, to like almost front and center for a good portion of it.
Yeah, and The Wire was like a game changer. There was an episode that was called The Wire, which was where Garrick was going through like detox, because he was using this implant that was in his brain that was keeping him from. It basically was like an antidepressant. It was meant to give him pleasure if he was ever tortured, but being in exile, he kept triggering the implant to give himself basically painkillers, and the implant was malfunctioning, and he was going through detox as his body was getting unused to all this steady dose of painkillers he was giving himself to forget that he was miserable being in exile. And so Bashir had to watch him as he detoxed and just spun web of lie after web of lie. And he's trying to get to the bottom of this to understand who Garrick really is. And he winds up getting to an understanding, but is it the understanding of who he is? Who knows? But like he said, when he asked at the end, he says, which parts of those stories were true? And then Garrick says all of them were true to a certain degree. And that's
right.
Garrick to a T. I mean, is it more interesting to wonder or more interesting to know? And I think it's more interesting to wonder.
Exactly. Like Garrick is one of those characters where he's so unreliable as far as being a character goes that it's one of those reasons you tune in to keep watching, is to see what exactly he's going to do next or where he's going to turn up next. I mean, like his addition, and I can't remember the actor's name, but he like just fantastic job overall with that character.
Andrew Robinson, I think he played I know he played the Scorpio killer in Dirty Harry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think his name's Andrew Robinson, and that's why he hated it. There was an episode where he had to play like he'd gone crazy a little bit and started killing people. And he says, I remember I read an interview. He said he hated doing that because he's like, great, now I'm the Scorpio killer again. And he didn't want to be typecast as a serial killer. But that was the one thing about Garrick. Here he could torture somebody without remorse or very little remorse, terrified of claustrophobic spaces. So he had all these like sensitivities and weak spots, but at the same time, he could find somebody else's weak spot. And there's a great episode. I forget which one it is, but he's torturing Odo, not because he wants to, but because he's been told to by, I think, his father to, get information from Odo, and he doesn't have any information. And I think Garrick knows it, but he's still terrified that maybe Odo knows something he should know. And so he's like in pain, knowing he's causing his friend pain, but also knowing he's got to do the job to impress his father.
Right. What was one of your favorite like story arcs on Deep Space Nine?
Probably the end parts, like season 6, season 7.
Okay.
There's a lot of good stuff that happens, especially at the beginning of season 6, where season 5 ends with the Cisco and the Federation basically mining the wormhole and then dropping back. So you have entire episodes at the very beginning with occupied Deep Space Nine. It's retaken by the Cardassians who built her. And so they're planning war from what used to be the heroes' home turf.
Mm-hmm.
And our heroes are having to fight for it back. And that part's probably my favorites. But my other favorite is near the end when basically, who was it? Damar and Wayoon are sparring back and forth. And when they finally part ways and Damar becomes a freedom fighter, like a lot of his battles are personal thumb of the nose to Wayoon. Like the first thing he bombs is Damar is a freedom fighter. The first thing he bombs is the Vorta cloning facility, which basically means Wayoon has a lifespan now instead of being infinitely cloned. So there's little moments in that where you could tell like they built up a friendship or at least a colleagueship, with their colleagues. Mm-hmm. But once they became on opposite sides, it clearly became personal to fight between the two of them.
I know that Deep Space Nine was one of the shows, for Star Trek at least, that really had, besides the Borg Wolf 359 episode, had some of the greatest starship battles ever seen on a Star Trek series. I like the first one I think of is when the Klingons try to take Deep Space Nine. And Deep Space Nine has all of those defenses that just suddenly pop out. And they're like, we've been waiting. We weren't expecting it to be the Klingons, but since you're here, we've got like this entire new defensive mechanism built into the space station. And then the other one is where I think it's like the Federation and the Romulans went into the Gamma Quadrant. And they had that huge like ship-to-ship battle between them and the Dominion Cardassian fleet.
Oh, yeah. I think the first one you're talking about is from, oh, my goodness, Way of the Warrior, which is what Worf's first episodes, I think. And you're right. It was one of the best battles they'd ever done. And they actually, a lot of those were actually the Braille class, which is the Klingon fighters, the smaller ones, not the bigger ones. A lot of them were actually like, they either took the Hallmark Christmas ornaments or the kits you buy at like a hobby store and glue together. And they took those and they packed those full of like glitter and random gunpowder. And so when they needed a Klingon ship exploding, they would detonate one of these homemade model kits that they made from like going to like Hobby Lobby or something. So those were the blowing up of the Braille class Klingon fighters. And some of the other ones in the background you don't see very clearly are just regular Hallmark ornaments that they bought. I remember that one. I think the other one was like there was a joint Cardassian Romulan force that was the same episodes where Garrick was torturing Odo, where they try to go in, they sweep out the Dominion, but it was all employed by the Dominion. The Dominion fleet just wipes them out.
Okay,
that might have been that one. One of my favorites, speaking of special effects, is the one where Chief O'Brien gets visions of the future and what could happen. So he uses that knowledge to stop bad events from happening. He has a vision of Deep Space Nine blowing up, and they took a spare model of Deep Space Nine and blew it up with micro explosives, and the thing looks beautiful. It looks like a movie special effect on TV. I think it's Visionary. I think it's the name of it, and he sees these visions, and one of the visions is Deep Space Nine blowing up. And if you watch that effect, it is gorgeous. It looks like something you'd see in a movie. I think they're all on Netflix, so I think it's Visionary. As I'm saying this, I'm looking at I hate to admit this, speaking of fandom, I have an entire encyclopedia of Deep Space Nine. So I probably can find that while we're talking. I've got one about the behind the scenes of how they wrote the show, and one that actually is the companion.
Yeah, and one of those things on the storyline side is just the inclusion of all the different races that I really enjoyed, especially like getting to see Nog be accepted into like Starfleet Academy, and then you just really got to like. I think that's one of those things that Next Generation wasn't able to do, is they were able to spend so much time with some of those smaller characters that you'd see in the background from time to time, but you didn't know them. But then with Deep Space Nine, you got to know them.
Yeah, I have to agree. They tried. Like there was episodes, and I think probably their greatest success was Chief O'Brien. And when they realized they'd fleshed him out, they're like, we need him. Like you said, they need to give him wings to kind of grow, and they moved him to Deep Space Nine. But there was a lot of attempts to that. They had Ashley Judd for a couple episodes where they had Robin Leffler. She played Robin Leffler. And there was some, I didn't realize she was in 3 episodes. I thought she was just in that very famous one with Wesley Crusher. And they tried it several times. And there was Nurse Ogawa. I mean, you never learned anything about her, but she was always in sickbay. And Dr. Crusher would always be like, where's Nurse Ogawa or something? And you'd always know she was there. But you never really learned, was she married? Did she have kids? What was she doing? What was her interests or her likes? You could talk about all the bridge crew, and you certainly knew who Nurse Ogawa was, but you really didn't really have a chance to flesh her out. I'll give you another good example. There's on Next Gen, there's this woman with dark, short hair, really short hair, and it's almost like it's all pushed up. You see her in the background in almost every episode later on. But we don't know her name. We don't know what her position is on the crew, anything. She's just this random background extra that always would be there. You knew she was part of the crew. You knew she was a regular, but I think she's even in Generations, the movie. But we don't know her name, her rank. I mean, you could look at her insignia for the rank, but we don't know what her speciality is or anything. And yet here's this character we've seen almost every week, but don't know anything about.
It's always fun for those like side characters and small characters when they're able to be brought forward and given some airtime, and then people start to love these characters, and that's all. Like, that is one of the great things. Like, Reginald Barkley from Next Generation
Mm-hmm.
appeared in every other series, like Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
That's true. I forgot about that. And I think even in Enterprise too, if I'm not mistaken. It may be in I want to say like the end when he appears in a cameo. I could be wrong. I know he shows up significantly in Voyager.
Yeah, because he's on the other end doing communications through the Doctor, I believe.
Mm-hmm. He uses the EMS, the Doctor, as a portal to get to communication through to the Delta Quadrant. I think they use the relay in the. They use a sensor relay, or did they use the Badlands? I think they use a sensor relay.
I think so. I don't think they did the Badlands because he was stationed out, I think in Mars or one of the moons of Saturn or Jupiter.
The Pathfinder project, I think it was. You're right, and it was through. You're right. It wasn't through the Badlands. It was through a sensor relay on the Delta Quadrant side, and it was controlled by the Hirogen. I think they took an issue with that in one episode. They're like, "You can't use our sensor array," and it almost caused like a battle for people. I think that's what it was. So the Hirogen was like this hunting race, and they used it to find their possible prey, and they didn't want Earth using their sensor array as a relay.
Now, getting away from science fiction and jumping over to a video game that you're really into, you told me before we started recording that you're like really into Overwatch. Is it?
That's true. Have you played Overwatch?
I have not. I am almost incapable of doing any first-person shooters because it's just too many buttons.
The thing is, most of my friends have been playing Blizzard games since the day before forever, and I kind of avoided them, not in any bad way, but because like a lot of my friends got super into gaming through Blizzard, and I'm like, I don't want to get addicted. So I was like, I don't want to get into World of Warcraft. My sister played World of Warcraft. A couple of my college friends did. And I'm like, I really can't afford it. And I don't want to get addicted to something I shouldn't be playing and couldn't afford. But a lot of my friends had nothing but good things to say. That Diablo, I never played. I tried playing Diablo. I couldn't get it to work on my computer. I've always had computers that were potatoes and couldn't run gaming. So when Overwatch was announced as a console game, I was like, this will be great. I get to play one of their games for the first time. And I know Diablo 3 finally came out for console, but having not played Diablo 2, I didn't know if I should be jumping into 3. So this was my first like foray into gaming by Blizzard.
Okay. I'm old school. I played like Warcraft and StarCraft, but then I never did World of Warcraft. I'm not a big MMO person. And I was just like, no, that's okay. But Overwatch is really pretty looking, and I like seeing like the clips and like the little short movies and everything, but the actual gameplay I don't think I'd be able to keep up with, let alone like all the button combinations I'd need to know.
I've gotten like super nerdy about watching other people play. It's one of the things I subscribe to on Twitch a lot of times. It's not just, like friends that have Twitch channels and stream creative stuff like cosplay or painting or drawing. It's been a lot of gaming, and I'm sitting at home and I'll be watching, and my wife will be doing something else, and I'll be sitting on the couch with her, and I've got Twitch on my phone, and I'm watching, and I'm like, they shouldn't have used that ability. They should have done this. They picked the wrong hero, because it's very, it's class based. If you've ever, I don't know if you're familiar with Team Fortress 2, where
I've seen it.
Yeah, you're not picking a character. It's not like in Halo where everybody's the same basic character, and you're just picking which weapon if you can find one. Different character in Halo, anybody that finds a weapon can use that weapon. And in the newer ones, they allow you to have one armor ability that lets you do either flying or fortify yourself or to provide a shield bubble, go invisible. And that was new to the newer Halos. But with a class-based, it's all exclusively whatever you pick determines how you play, and you're not picking up somebody else's weapon they've dropped. You've got your weapons, and only you can use those. And that's pretty much Overwatch. You don't get to pick up, here's a random shotgun. You don't pick up a shotgun. You're issued one, and that's the one you use. And if you don't use the shotgun, you're not getting one. And I remember reading about Overwatch, and they were talking about, like, just in general with the design aspect. And what you said about being colorful and fun to look at, that's true. I just read a lot about it. And the game they originally made was called Titan. and they played it and they were like, this isn't fun. And so they said, that's got to be an awful creative thing to spend all that money, working on it for like, I think 5 to 10 years. And they're like, this just isn't fun. And I know how, as an artist, how frustrating it is to make something and be like, this just doesn't work. And all those hours are gone because this is just, it's not garbage. It's just not really good. It's bland. So they just said, okay, take what we like, make everything fun, go. And that's literally the design aesthetic they used from what I read from Overwatch. They were like, okay, let's have a floating car. And then the design team go, floating cars are fun. And then they said, okay, new design rule. All cars in Overwatch float. And they just could go forward like that. And I always call it the Pixar world. It's very like bright and colorful and cartoony and not too serious. And in fact, some of the darker characters in the game are almost laughed at because they're almost like, yeah, you're dark, but you're not really that dark. You're pretending to be darker than you actually are.
Okay.
So,
now, who's your favorite character to play?
Favorite characters to play, probably Diva, Symmetra, and Lucio. All three of they're basically supports and tank characters. And my playstyle has always been one of I want to support my team. So in Halo, I was never the guy that got 50 kills. I was the guy that was always going in and helping my team get those 50 kills, but I wasn't like the all-star. I would do my best to do as much as I could. And that's kind of the play style of Diva. She's not an assassin character. She doesn't go in to, get massive amounts of eliminations. She goes in and she supports. She goes in, deals damage, and if the enemy's firing, she shields them. So she can flip-flop between attacking and defending within a moment's notice. Plus, her character is a video gamer. She actually, in her actual storyline, is that she was the top Korean gamer for StarCraft. So
really?
Yeah. So yes, and actually, I think for StarCraft 2, they have an add-on that lets her be an announcer for it. I've never played StarCraft, but that's what I've heard. So like her she's in a mecha suit, but when you're looking through her eyes, what you're seeing on the screen is her holding 2 joysticks. So it's a very weird experience being a video game player playing a character who looks like they're playing a video game. So it's kind of a weird like inception, a video game within a video game kind of concept. And so that's kind of a fun kind of thing. You don't really feel like I don't feel like I'm playing the characters. A lot of times, especially with Diva, I feel like I'm playing beside them or with them like a co-pilot, which is kind of fun. And then Lucio, he's a healer. Lucio's got to be one of the greatest characters I've ever seen in a video game. He doesn't have much of a story. He does. You have to kind of, like you said, watch the animated shorts. They've got great comics. They've got great online stories. Not much of it is in the game, but Lucio, as far as character design, is one of the most fun characters I've ever seen. He's a healer, but he's a DJ, so he heals through music. So as long as you're in his radius of his music and you can hear his music, you're getting healing or a speed boost. But he wears roller skates, so he can also jump on walls and skate along walls. So here you've got this guy that's skating along walls, broadcasting his music to help his team be healed and move quickly. And I'm like, one of their character in video games that turns you into a roller skating DJ that can ride walls. I don't know of another game that does.
That sounds incredibly wild. I've not seen too much of the different characters besides like the main ones that people seem to use, like Diva or Kree or like some of the bigger characters. I can't ever remember their names. Like the one with the shield and
Reinhardt.
There's one with the hook. Yep.
Roadhog, yeah. And each one of them has a very specific skill set, but I think a lot of folks emphasize the damage dealers, the DPS characters, and they're fun, but they're not, to me, it's more fun playing like a tank character, like the Reinhardt, where Reinhardt can shield his team, but then he can also drop his gigantic hammer and stun everybody on the ground, which is a lot of fun. I'm not too mechanically gifted with aiming, which tends to be like how you climb in ranks and get better. So I prefer characters that require more strategy than necessarily aiming. I mean, I'm okay with aiming, but I'm not like a great sniper. So I pick characters that rely more on thinking, which is I prefer like real-time strategy games a lot. I don't know if you've ever played Armada 2, which is like Star Trek universe. And you build bases, and it's strategy and thinking things through. And some of that comes through with Overwatch, where it's not just, pick a character, shoot things. It's which character should I pick? which character gives our team a better balance, what do they have, and what would be a good counter to what they have. And that appeals to me way more than just running around shooting stuff Call of Duty style.
Right. I like the strategy aspect and the team building aspect of it, where you have to really figure out what your balance needs to be versus like what the other team is fielding.
And I love board games like chess, and I like the strategy of thinking it through. And that comes to me with Overwatch. It's like I said, it's not just simply put in disc, pick up controller, shoot things. A lot of it has to do with, okay, what's good, what's not good. We can't go in with 4 damage dealers, guys. We need a tank and a healer of some sort at least. And which ones you have, some of them work better with each other. There's a combo called Pharmacy, which is Pharah and Mercy, because they both fly. Mercy basically goes midair and joins onto Pharah and heals her as she deals rocket damage from above. And there's all kinds of like combinations that work better than just two random characters that have led to just good strategy and even fan-based stories. The fan base is both lively and creative, and also sometimes terrifying when it comes to Overwatch. But that's the one thing I like, because it's not just checkers, it's chess. It's not everybody gets the same checker like Halo. It's chess. There's pawns, there's kings, there's queens. Everything has its own purpose, and knowing which one your team needs and how to use it is what really appeals to me about Overwatch.
It's one of those things where I want to play, but I know that I would never be good at it. Like, I played original Doom and Wolfenstein, and those were my shooters, and I can't do anything beyond that.
Yeah, there's some characters in Overwatch that I don't even touch, because like Genji, he is one of the highest, what they call highest skill tier. You have to be like really good with him, and I don't even touch him, because I'm like, you literally have to be button mashing. It becomes like Mortal Kombat. You have to just like randomly hit buttons, and I'm like, I can't do that. Give me 1 or 2 things to do and I'm good.
Definitely. Now, when I introduced you at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned that you were an artist, and it's something that I've been trying to get on the podcast more as artists.
Nice.
So how did you get into art? Was it something when you were small, you just gravitated towards art? Was it something later in life where you started just drawing and evolving it from there, like in high school?
Much more at an earlier age. I grew up in a household where my mom did a lot of art things. She could draw. She was gifted at drawing. She wrote a book that she printed at home. Well, actually, she typed it at home. This was before they had printers. She typed it all with a typewriter. It was a Christmas gift from my sister and myself, and she typed out each copy by hand, and she wrote the story and illustrated it too. So she was very gifted with illustration, and she would knit. She made a lot of clothing, so she was very gifted at clothing. I learned how to sew from her. So I do like a lot of our curtains and hemming pants here in our household with my wife, because of her. So she was very gifted in a lot of artistic realms. And when I was younger, I would often copy a lot of what I would see. Like when my sister started school, I wanted to be in school with her, even though I was a year younger than her. So I wound up mimicking people that I admired. And I think I probably latched onto the drawing from my mom part of it. Although my great uncle, my dad's uncle, he was artistically gifted too. He would do painting, oil painting. He was a barber by trade, but then he would paint. So I grew up seeing his painting hang over my mom's chair in the living room. So I think it was just through her, and I would see, obviously comics in the Sunday paper and want to copy those sorts of things. And also I'd see Bob Ross on TV, the crazy guy, the guy with the crazy hair. I'd see him on PBS, and Bob Ross would do his landscape paintings. And I was like, oh, that always looks so peaceful. So I've always had an interest in art, and seeing him paint made me want to learn more about it. So like around, I think age 10 or 12 or so, I told my parents, hey, I'd like to really get some art supplies for Christmas instead of like, football or a baseball glove. I still wanted some of those things, but I wanted art supplies more than anything. And so they encouraged me. They didn't like force an art set in my hand. They were like, oh, if that's what you want, we'll get you some supplies. And for birthdays and Christmas, I'd get supplies. And I'd start off with like poster paints and, school colored pencils. And I got my mom's colored pencil Prismacolor set that she had. She would teach illustration, and she gave me those. And so I started trading up to better quality supplies, practicing more, and mostly self-taught. Obviously in an atmosphere where my mom knew some things, and I'd go to the library, get as many books as I could. I went to college after graduation, like a year or two after I graduated high school. I already knew a great deal, and a lot of my colleagues were like, my classmates were like, "Wow, you know a lot about art. You can really draw." And then I was there for a longer period of time and learned how much I needed to learn still. So I learned a lot in college. I got a lot of the technical know-how out of the way, like how to hold a pencil, not being shy with it, making marks. But I learned so much more in college. But I've been drawing since I was probably 8 or 10.
Okay. Is there something particular that you focus on as far as your drawing goes? Is it more like sequential comic book type stuff? Is it more, say, fan art where you're drawing? I know that you did like the Rogue One piece that was recently. Is it a mixture of both? Like, what do you tend to gravitate towards?
Lately, a lot more portraiture. I started off when I was younger with a lot of animals and landscapes, and like when I was in my 10s and 12s. And I started when I started getting into baseball when I was younger. I started drawing a lot of I was an Atlanta Braves fan during the 91, 92 seasons when they started really going to the playoffs a lot. So I draw a lot of those folks. So I wound up doing a lot of portraiture of the Braves players. And so as I grew up, I probably drew them, especially the more famous, plenty of times. Colored pencil, acrylic paint, you name it. And then when I grew up, I realized I hadn't really done much portraiture of women at all. I had zero skill set in that. So I said, okay, now that I've got a little bit more mature in my portraiture, let me kind of shift to doing something I haven't done, portraits of women. So I started doing more portraiture along those lines, but still do portraiture in general and just expand that way. And in college, I think most of my work was either self-portraits, because self-portraits, you don't have to worry about how you make yourself look. You're doing your own painting. So it didn't matter if it looked good or not. As long as it was a good painting, it didn't have to make yourself look flattering at all. Which was the easiest thing. I only had to please myself and my teachers, and that was it. And then a lot of my second semester drawing was all sketches and drawings of Alfred Hitchcock, stuff themed off of his movies. So when I graduated, I have to admit, this is kind of an embarrassing thing to admit, but I was never really into comic books until 2008. So I completely skipped over that fandom until the last, I guess 9 years now. And so I never really grew up reading comics. I never sketched Spider-Man in an awesome pose. I never drew Batman in the shadows. And I grew up, and then after I started getting into comics, I'm like, the stuff that kids drew in their notebooks, I have no idea how to do. Because, every kid, sketched Batman punching the Joker or something. And here I am like, how do you even do that? Because I didn't grow up drawing those things. So oftentimes I'll go, if I'm at a convention and I'm asked to draw something, I'm like, how do you do that? I know most people have already done this. And I almost panic a little bit. But I don't know if that helps me or hinders me, that I've come from more of the fine art side and kind of come late to the game.
Is there anything that's influential for you for your art? Like either like if there's comic book artists or a particular artist that you're like you kind of gear your work towards, or somebody that really just influenced you art style wise?
Oh, definitely. Coming at the comic book side of things from the fine art side, I really got used to the fine artists first. Found myself kind of looking into stuff like John Singer Sargent. A lot of his great portraits are up at Biltmore House, which I'm lucky enough that I now finally have gone to see that. So he did a lot of great portraiture in the Gilded Age, late 1890s, 1900s, that kind of era. Like, Robert Louis Stevenson and what's his name? I can't remember. There's a famous author, last name James, but Henry James, I think it was. So that time frame, that era. Him, Edward Hopper, Edward Manet, who did a lot of portraits and slice of life kind of drawings. And then as I started getting into more of the comic book side of things, I started going into artists like Adam Hughes and Terry Dodson and those sorts of people that did more realistic, less stylized art in a comic book setting. Okay. I don't mind stylized art. I think I gravitate more to something more realistic. I'm starting to getting more of appreciation for something that's more stylized, but I still find myself going more for more something that looks more realistic or even photorealistic, like you'll see in like Adam Hughes's covers, which are just mind-blowingly beautiful. And he's coming at it looking at like Norman Rockwell. So he's looking at Norman Rockwell making art covers, and I'm looking at Norman Rockwell and him and going, wow, that's something I want to do, is that kind of realistic, almost a photo kind of look. And when I remember there was a cover Adam Hughes did for Catwoman. You may know this one. He did this cover where Catwoman's holding a police blotter, like she'd just been booked and she had her mugshot taken.
Okay.
It got very famous because, and the only reason I knew it before I got into comics was because Adam Hughes quite cleverly put the numbers from the TV show Lost on the police blotter. So fans of Lost are like, oh my God, he just put the numbers from Lost on the cover of Catwoman. And I first saw that and thought it was a photo. And then when I later found out it was actually a drawing, I was like, I'm instantly a fan of Adam Hughes because he'd taken what I thought was a photograph and it was an illustration. And it was on a cover of a comic book. It was just beautiful. And I would admire his stuff probably the most.
Okay, that's cool. Is there any are there any comics that you're currently reading now that you're into, or any of the like current artists that are out there, or is it more that you're trying to work on your own stuff, either comics or like artwork to go to conventions with?
I'm really ashamed to say I wish I was reading more. I'm trying to write my own comic, basically like an Alice in Wonderland story growing up. And one of the challenges that comes from that is you have to world build when you write.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a very good writer. I'm still learning. So I pick comics that build worlds from scratch. Like Batman doesn't really world build anymore. You don't have to pick up a comic and go, who is this guy, the Batman? What does he do? He's got a fandom. Everybody knows that Batman is Bruce Wayne. His parents were shot by a killer in an alley. And he swore that day that he would fight crime. Well, not that day, but he fell into a Batcave. Everybody knows the legend. It's not like we have to understand who he is. And you get a comic book like, say, East of West, where we're like, what is this world? Right now, I've been going through The Wicked and the Divine because that's just such a bizarre concept. But I was like, okay, let me get into this world building, see how he builds this world from the ground up. I was reading Saga for a while. I need to get volume 2 because I got through my volume 1 that someone gave me. And that's another good world builder. It starts with nothing, and you have to understand this really bizarre world, and it builds very organically. I think you mentioned this earlier, where it's like that first part of Rogue One's kind of very boring because you're getting to learn all the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the toughest part about world building. You start off with a lot of, oh, hey, here's so-and-so. Let's meet this person. And Deep Space Nine goes through that in the first episode. And if you compare that to, say, Voyager's first episode, where it's done a lot more organically, Voyager's premiere is a lot more seamless in its introductions than Deep Space Nine. And Voyager's the way more successful premiere episode. It feels like a TV movie, and you're not awkwardly meeting these random people at random times. You're meeting these people in a very natural, flowing way that helps you get to know each person individually. Now I want to go see Caretaker, the first episode, and I've got myself into it. But seeing it done well is not something you see very often, because there's a lot of great stories that start off with awful, clumsy introductions. So something like Saga starts off pretty easily, and that's because is a good writer. I think it's Brian Vaughan writes that, right? I think.
Yeah, it's Brian K. Vaughan. Yep.
Yeah, and he's no slouch when it comes to introducing a new world, and he did a great job. I mean, it just unfolds. You're given enough to understand what's going on, but you're not getting the full story in such a clumsy way that it's like, I got it. We're meeting new people. That can get very tiresome when you're starting a new world, and it just unfolds so naturally. And to a certain degree, that happened with The Wicked and the Divine. But that's where I've been trying to focus more on those kind of comics that are in original universes. Like, well, Watchmen does that too. Watchmen kind of world builds. It's kind of a DC book, but because they couldn't use original existing characters, they basically had to introduce everybody from the ground up in a world building way. So I've been reading those, and I want to read more so I can. You can't write unless you read very well. You have to read a lot. and it improves your writing. And like you said, I've been kind of focusing more on getting stuff ready for conventions and working on stuff, and finding good books and finding the time to go buy them has been something I've been neglecting, and I need to get back to actually focusing more on reading to improve my writing.
Same here. Last year I read, I think, like 60 books in the year. And this year I think I've read 2 or 3, and it's April as we're recording this. So I'm super behind on where I wanted to be this year.
I'm lucky I got that my friend who does some writing, and he's like, "Oh, I've got Wicked and Divine I can let you borrow." And I was like, "Oh, please, I need world building stories." And I've been speaking of other things, like what draws me to books. I've been collecting Betty and Veronica Archie comics, not because I'm a Archie fan, but exclusively because Adam Hughes is doing interiors. So I've been collecting those just because the artist that's involved. And I also was reading, and I've been missing some issues of, what's it called? I Hate Fairyland by Scotty Young.
Okay.
So the last issue was kind of underwhelming, but by far and large, it's dark, but not super dark. It's like tongue-in-cheek dark. I don't know how much you know about it, but it's basically about this little girl that gets sucked into her fairy world and gets stuck there for 20 years. So she's a 30-year-old woman with all of the sarcasm of wanting to get out of this fairy world, but she's still a 10-year-old's body in a candy-coated world. So there's like no curse words in it, even though you could tell she's trying to say curse words, but she doesn't know what curse words are because she's in a fairyland. So it's fun because you know as an adult what's going on, even though it's in a candy-coated world. So it's pretty fun, but I haven't got any new ones. Plus, Scotty Young's cartoony style is just incredible. And he does like all of the pencils and writing and inking, and the only thing he doesn't do is the coloring. But it's pretty solid. But that I've been collecting because the art's fun, and Betty and Veronica have been collecting because it's Adam Hughes. And I will buy books because of the artist that's on them, even if I'm not really necessarily into the storyline.
Right, totally. I get that because, I mean, some of the people's artwork is just so amazing. I just want to have the art. I don't need the story. And I know I do that with a lot of comic covers where I'm like, I would love to just have that cover framed somewhere.
And there's one Batman Black and White that came out, and Adam Hughes did interiors for that. And I think actually the interior reprint was worse. I know there's always a suffering of art when it's scanned in and made publishing ready because there's always a loss in quality. But Adam Hughes's originals had warm and cool neutral tones. Mm-hmm. And for the book, they scanned it in and made it just grayscale. And I've seen the original art scans from Adam Hughes shares it on his like social media. And I was like, that was the one time I bought the art and was disappointed because the original art is way better than what they put in the printed book, like a lot better. And I'm saving more of the original scans that Hughes has shared in the actual book. I mean, I'm glad to have the book, but the art in the final, like before it was put for publishing, was way better when it was just grayscale, not grayscale art, but the warm and cool gray colors that he uses for his shading. It was just gorgeous art. It was like it wasn't even comic book art. It was like illustration that just happened to be in a comic book. Like Alex Ross, you know how when he does a book, it's like not really, you know, heavy outlines and stuff. They almost look like paintings, and that's what Hughes' story. It was like a short story focusing on Catwoman and Batman. It was like 6 or 8 pages, but they look like illustrations, they look like painting illustrations, not like comic book illustrations.
Yeah, I love seeing stuff like that. I love seeing almost the non-traditional comic book art whenever I go to like conventions and stuff, and just seeing everybody's different style and take on like the same character, because you're going to see like the same 15, 20, 30 Batmans, but then you're going to find those people who do Batman just so incredibly different. And that's like, those are the pieces I'm going to be buying, is the ones that are totally non-traditional. That's
with me too. Like, 2 things I love about conventions is, one is seeing the original art, which is infinitely better than the prints could ever be. I mean, you always lose quality. And the first convention I ever went to was Heroes Con in 2013, and Adam Hughes was there, and I felt so greedy that he had his portfolio book there, because I got to see the real art, and I was blown away about how even more beautiful his art was in real life. And that's true with every artist I've ever seen. The final art will do a good justice to it, but it's never as truly as beautiful as the original art. And the other thing, speaking of diversity, like you said, there's like 200 Batmans. I have a soft spot for Harley Quinn, and everybody's drawn Harley Quinn. But whenever I find a unique print, that's the one I'll get. A couple of years ago, I got a print from Mike Ruth, who works out of Canada, and he did this Viking style Harley Quinn. It was so great. I'm like, I've never seen a Viking style Harley Quinn. I'm buying that because it was so unique and so great.
That's awesome. I just love something like that. Like that is one of my favorite things, is just finding the unique art, the unique take on characters, where it's just so incredibly different. Like it's almost an insta buy. Like I have to have that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So for those who have been listening to the podcast and they want to take a look at your art or see what you've got going on, what's the best place that they can find you online?
Well, there's two good places. I'll share quick sketches and stuff at my Instagram, which is pretty easy. It's just instagram.com/Jason Enos Art. That's Enos, E-N-O-S, Jason Enos Art. And the other place that's probably pretty easy to find is my Facebook, which is facebook.com/Jason Enos Comic Art.
Okay.
And there's stuff there. I have a Wix page as well. I'm trying to build a website, and I think that one's jasonenosart.wix.com/illustration. So that's a little cumbersome to type out. I think my Instagram has the actual page on there. Like there's a link on my Instagram to that page.
Okay.
So, because again, some of these things are a little bit more cumbersome as I work out the best links. But yeah, jasonenosart.wix.com/illustration has kind of more of a portfolio view of it. But Instagram has a lot more of my day-to-day. If I'm doing like a quick sketch, I'll share like progress of it or something on there.
Okay, great. And I'll have all those links to your website and Facebook page, Instagram, and everything else put in the show notes and on our Facebook page as well. So that way, if you guys are listening, you can definitely go and check out Jason's work.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate you sharing those links.
Not a problem. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time and coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was good to be here. Glad you had me, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.